There we go. Awesome. Welcome. Welcome, welcome.
Hello. Thank you.
Regardless of the
Thanks for
time
calling
difference.
at the dead of night.
Yeah, this is a normal time for me because I usually work nights, but so it works out
Right.
pretty well. You're in Singapore, correct?
Yeah, we are.
What's
Yeah.
it like over there? Is it hot? It's really hot here today.
Oh, it always is hot. It's like 28 degrees to 35 most days. We are in a partial lockdown. We're not probably as locked down as you guys are out there, but we are in something that they call a circuit breaker, which means that most of the companies can't open, the shops, the businesses can't open. You're supposed to stay at home, but you can still go out and have a run, or well, you can't swim because all the pools are closed. But yeah, we're kind of in the middle of a semi lockdown. We'll probably come out of it next month, and I guess we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, it's about the same here. Most businesses are partially open. You can't go to restaurants or
Yeah,
anything with the other place, but you can go to work or you can go to drive through, pick up food or whatever. But
right.
yeah, are you keeping yourself busy in lockdown?
Oh yeah, well, it's a great time to start writing, isn't it? Because usually you don't have much time. Like just like you, I'd probably be writing in the dead of night at 12 a.m. But now I've got all day, so that works really well in
Yeah.
some respects. Yeah.
Well, that's why I wanted to get some of these interviews done too. I thought now would be the time everybody's stuck at home and we can do some chatting and get some promo out onto YouTube and
Yeah, yeah, it's a good idea. Yeah.
yeah. And I don't think I mean I've been involved with other anthologies before, but I don't think we've done anything like this with anything else that I've worked with. So I was excited to get this project on board and we can see everybody's pretty faces and
Yeah.
so first question, you're the author of Miss Cassidy and the
And the
hoping I'm
Pontianak.
pronouncing Pontianak.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah,
pretty good. Yeah.
for Not Just a Pretty Face, Women of Horror, Volume 1. So I'm starting to get a little bit tired. So I love Miss Cassidy. I really hope
Oh,
you
thank
write
you.
lots and lots of stories about her. But what was the inspiration for that story?
Well, it was we have a lot of horror and a lot of horrible monsters really in Southeast Asia, which I think a lot of people don't know about that much. I think most people are familiar with like monsters from Germany or maybe some Japanese ones, but you don't really know that much about Southeast Asian ones simply because it's a very remote area for the rest of the world, and a lot of the creepy crawlies that we've got here are very unique to this place. Um, and most people don't really know that of our most famous monster is the Pontianak, but nobody really knows about her. But she's a very creepy character. She's like a vampire, really, and she's a beautiful woman that kind of haunts banana groves. And her task is to find men who stray from their wives. And if you're straying from your wife, you find a beautiful woman, and you get close to her, and then she turns into a monster, drinks your blood, smashes you up. And there are various versions of her. There are some versions of her where she will turn into an old woman, or she might turn into something which is just a head, or she might turn into something which has just her gut spilling out. And she's one of the most vicious monsters that we've got. And of course it was because during the time in Southeast Asia especially, women don't have a lot of power, and wives don't have a lot of power. So that was their power. That was to say, all right, if you stray from me, you're gonna get eaten by a Pontianak. So don't stay home, come home, and yeah, be a good boy. So that's the basis for a lot of the female ghosts that we have. I think in Asia in general, because there are a lot of very scary ones in China and Japan as well. But a lot of people don't realize that we've got all these creepy things, unless you watch a lot of Japanese horror or something like that, which is unusual. So I just thought it would be fun to bring that character that's so iconic here and combine her with something that is, in a sense, from the West, something that is more identifiable in a general sense. And I'm married to a Scotsman. He's from Scotland, so I made her Scottish simply because I'm more familiar with that. Like, I wouldn't make an American character because I have friends who are American, but I have no very personal experience with it, but I have a lot of experience with being in UK, with, you know, with the culture there, with the kind of people that they have there, and with the kind of legends they have there, like the fairies and the witches, and, you know, the legends of Vivian and Morgan, and that kind of the druids and things like that. So I decided I would make something like that. I would bring the two worlds together and clash them together in as weird a way as I could possibly manage. And I thought one of the best times to write a story like that would be around the 1890s, because that's when the combination, that was when the British Empire was pretty much at its peak, but it was also coming down a little bit, because that was when a lot of other colonial countries were going, well, we don't really want to be part of the empire anymore.
Yeah.
So you've got this weird dichotomy of the British people there, who are supposed to be the colonial masters, but at the same time, we've got all the immigrant Chinese and the native Malays here in Singapore who are going, well, we don't really want to be under you guys anymore. We like to push you out as quietly as we can. And that was kind of the background of it. And yeah, I guess it was more just to bring the two worlds together and see what would happen, and kind of quite fun things happened, I think.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I really love the Miss Cassidy character. Like I said, I hope
Oh,
you can
thanks.
write more. I think she should be a series. I think she would make a great
I would love
series
to
of,
make her.
yeah, like YA novels or stories or something like that. Like she's just a great character. And I especially love the line where she says, "Why do you think praying to a desert god would work with a tropical monster? Come on."
Yeah.
I thought that was just so
Yeah.
wonderful. And how the two cultures came together. And I I read somewhere, I heard somewhere, actually, no, I think it was Nadia Bulkin, who is Indonesian. She mentioned that
Yeah.
ghosts in Southeast Asia are a completely different thing than they are in North America. And
Yeah.
so I was curious about sort of just that idea of, you know, in Southeast Asia, you sit down and have dinner with your ghosts. You don't, you know, they're not just these things that you kind of try to avoid or that scare you until you leave.
Yeah.
So I was wondering
Yeah.
some more about
It is
it.
a different. I think there's a different way of approaching it. So if you saw, like, in Singapore, I don't know how it is in Indonesia. It's probably quite similar. But in Singapore, you have people who claim that they can see things. But it's not a big deal here. It's not like, oh, you've got to be a medium and go around being a psychic. You know, it's just, okay, fine. They can see things. Don't step there. They told you not to step there. Don't step there. And that's really, it's a very kind of day-to-day thing. You know, like you'll have friends who go, I see someone on that swing, but maybe you shouldn't go to that swing. And you go, oh, all right, you see something there. Like, yeah. And it varies, you know, and it's not a big deal here. I've noticed that in a lot of other places, like you get a lot of reality TV, for instance, coming from North America, where there are mediums going to haunted houses and stuff like that to see what's going on. But here, if you live in a haunted house, you live in a haunted house. You know, it's not necessarily a huge thing. You'd put an altar, depending on what religion, what background you've got. But if you are from a traditional Asian culture, you just put an altar there and go, all right, spirits, whoever you are, here's some oranges, eat the oranges, leave me alone. And that's kind of how, we all do it. Even the boys who go for national service here, they all have to go to the army for 2 years. They're actually taught in the army by their officers, if you have to pee against a tree, apologize to the spirits around the tree before you pee on the tree. And it's something that's been going on for years and years and years. It's just a way of going, all right, we respect that there is another dimension here. There are maybe other things that we can't see. Just in case, we're going to say, I'm sorry, I'm peeing in your tree. And it's just a thing here that's we have the Hungry Ghost Festival where, once a year, the gates of hell open and all the ghosts come out, and you're just basically supposed to, put food out for them, have parties for them, and then at the end of the month they go back home to hell. You move on with your life. So yeah, it's kind of a different culture here. Like, you've got ghosts, yeah, it's a part of life, and you just deal with it.
Yeah, oh, that's really fascinating. I mean, that it sounds a little bit like Halloween, but in how Halloween is, you know this, your husband being Scottish, but it's supposed to be the time when the plane between the living and the dead is the narrowest, and we have to
Yeah.
give out an offering so that they won't take our kids, kind of thing. But
Yeah.
it sounds like a similar idea. But much, like you said, much more relaxed. I think that's kind of interesting that there's a lot that's very different, but a lot that's kind of the same too. When you get
Yeah,
right down to the roots of different legends, and it's interesting to go, oh, okay, I recognize something like that.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, so what other, do you have any other stories, horror things that you've written? I mean, I only know the one story. Do you have other stuff that we can uh, promote or talk about?
Well, I'm a local writer, so a lot of the books that I do will probably not be easily available in North America. But I've got a science fiction novella, and it's called The Messiah Virus. It's out in Singapore. I'm also a comic book script writer, so I've got a comic book out now, which is done for the Vietnam War. It's called The Once in Marvelous DKD. It is available only online, but it's actually about the Vietnam War and the Singaporean musicians who went to entertain the US troops in Vietnam, which Singapore does not like to talk about it
Oh,
because
that
it
sounds
puts us
awesome.
very squarely on one side. You know, we were on the US side at that time, but we can't say that because Vietnam is basically it's a Southeast Asian country. So they don't talk about it very much. But actually, during the Vietnam War, Singapore was quite squarely on the side of the US, and they were sending musicians to entertain the US troops at the time. And a lot of the musicians are still alive. You can still ask for your immediate input, their experiences there, but nobody's really talked about it. So we thought we'll do a comic book, and we'll make it fictional so that we don't get in trouble. You know, in Singapore you get in trouble quickly when you do something they don't like. So we did a fictional story, and yeah, that's the latest thing that's out right now.
Oh, that's so amazing. I really wish this was available in North America, even as an ebook or something that we can order. I don't know
Yeah,
if you've got a publisher you can work with to try and get it out there, but I'd love to read it. It sounds like a great story.
well, I could send you one if you like.
Awesome. I sound like I feel like such a collector when you get like the one thing that's not available to everybody else. Oh, that's so awesome. So I assume because you like to write, you also like to read. What other than the myths and legends? What do you consider some of your influences? Some other writers that you like to read?
Wow, that's a lot of people. um, I think in terms of horror specifically, I was a huge Stephen King fan in the 80s. I still kind of am. It's just I haven't read that much of him recently. But yeah, he's very influential. He just made me think of horror in a different way. Because when I was growing up, Singapore didn't have a very big literary scene back in the 80s and 70s. So you get very sort of pulp fiction that comes out, you know, of true Singapore ghost stories. It's just about somebody gets hit in the head and they look around, there's ghosts. It's very kind of basic horror, so to speak. But when you read Stephen King, it's very mind-blowing. You know, you get a novel that thick, and somehow you can't stop reading. You just keep going and going and going and going, and by the time you come out, you're just in a totally different headspace. And that was just like a revelation to me, you know, how somebody could write that way. I also read a lot of fantasy and science fiction, and some of I mean, fantasy often has a certain horror element to it as well, like Lord of the Rings and, you know, Saruman and stuff like that. So I read a lot of Tolkien. I read a lot of Terry Pratchett as well. If he had not died, I would still be reading Terry Pratchett. Neil Gaiman. So of course I read a lot of comic books. A lot of them were from the DC Vertigo imprint, which was their darker adult imprint. So I
Right.
read Sandman, and I read Hellblazer, Preacher, and it gave me a slightly warped idea of what American culture is like, unfortunately. But yeah, it took me a while to realize, all right, that's not what America actually looks like. But yeah, and I think I read a lot of we didn't have a lot of local fiction here, but I read a lot of Japanese and Indian fiction as well. Yeah, so those were quite interesting. And I think for horror as well, I watched a lot of movies, and Asian movies especially are quite scary. Like the Ring, for instance, that's probably the scariest horror movie I've ever watched in my life. It still is. You know, the Japanese version where she just comes out of the TV and doesn't speak and just comes right at you. That's just still the creepiest thing ever. And yeah, and then when I was I did a university in Australia, and I actually did I did a paper that was literally about Japanese horror. because
Uh,
there is a specific way that the Japanese do horror that is not like anybody else in the world, where everybody feels isolated, and it always involves a child that's abused in some way, which is very upsetting. but that's what it is, and it kind of makes you think, well, kids in Japan must feel very isolated sometimes, or feel a lot of oppression sometimes, for all this horror to come out, and all of it has the same theme, like a kid who drowns in a vat of water because their parents forgot to pick them up from school. There was the theme of dark water. Like there wasn't really, the kid wasn't, it was just neglected. She wasn't abused at all. She was just, people forgot to pick her up from school. She walks home in the rain, she drowns, and then she becomes a vengeful ghost. And it was just a repetitive theme. A kid gets lost, a kid like randomly goes to a cabin and randomly finds a videotape. There are no parents, no teachers, no guidance, no nothing. It's just this poor kid all alone, and it just repeats and repeats over and over again. And I think it's interesting to see that horror from different parts of the world kind of reflects the culture that it comes from. Like, how do you feel vulnerable? In what way you feel is most vulnerable? Like if you're reading a Stephen King novel, a lot of it is just, if you're out in the open and there's just nothing around you but cornfields, for instance, that is vulnerable. That is like, you're unprotected. You've got no car, you've got no weapons, you've got nothing. Anything can come out from you from the corn, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I saw Dark Water. I saw both the American and the original Japanese version,
Yeah.
and I also, one of the things that I've noticed about that story was just how incredibly sad that woman's
Yeah.
life was.
Yeah.
On top of losing her child, or well, she didn't lose a child, but the divorce, and it was just bad relationship, and then trying to connect with her own daughter, but just not
Yeah.
knowing how, and then she's got this ghost hanging around.
Yeah.
Um, it just kept, it was more sad than scary to me.
Yeah.
And I think that some stories will affect you differently, um,
Yeah.
depending on the story, right? So we were talking earlier about our phobias. So what scares you?
Oh, wow. uh, Spiders. I
There's
think
one
if
on
you
my
lock me
wall
in a
right
room
now.
for
Although
yeah.
where you are, they grow the spiders a lot bigger than where I am. The spider that I'm looking at is just a little teeny tiny guy.
Yeah, well, I mean, Singapore doesn't have that many. We do have poisonous spiders, but they're not that bad. I grew up a lot around snakes, so I'm not afraid of snakes, but spiders I don't like. I think it's just too many legs and too many eyes. Um, I don't like very open spaces either. I think it's probably something that's left over from Stephen King, where if you're alone in an open space, watch out, something's coming for you. So yeah, I mean, I live in a city as well, and we are a very densely packed country. So for me, I'm more comfortable in a place where I can see all the walls. Like I know nothing's gonna drop out at me from a shadow. Yeah, but I don't have anything that's very specific. I think if you lock me in a very dark room with spiders, that would probably just scare the
Ugh.
crap out of me. That's pretty much it, I think.
Yeah, I don't like the big ones, the big creepies.
Yeah.
Well, I'm discovering horrors on the internet that I didn't think would be scary, and then I start reading them, and I just think, ah! I've been reading about skinwalkers and sleep paralysis and all these terrible things people go
Oh,
through, and
yeah,
I
yeah,
just think,
yeah,
wow.
yeah, yeah. Actually, yeah, a lot of those things are like I think there was a case where, well, more than one case where somebody went under the knife for an operation, and the anesthetic didn't work, but she couldn't say anything because she's fully paralyzed
Oh,
from
oh,
I forget what it was, but that is terrifying. I mean, I just can't imagine. That is awful.
yeah, that's, oh, don't even, yeah, we could just talk about horrifying things. We were talking about, yeah, and eyes are a big one for me too. I just,
Oh
anything about
yeah.
eyes, I just, oh, I don't want to hear it, don't want to hear it. So do you ever try to go for the really gross out, or do you try more of a psychological terror, or?
I'm not very good at doing gory horror because I think my vocabulary just doesn't work that way. It doesn't give you that sense of, a proper, like, I could just say, oh, your intestines and spilling out and there's blood all over the place, but that doesn't really, it's supposed to give you that sense of like, but I'm not really quite able to write it that way. I've tried, and it just comes out very corny. So I just kind of leave it to the people who are really good at it, because it's so easy to mess that up, right? You can't just keep going. My guts are spilling out, and I pull the heart out, and there's a brain on the ground. And, to a certain extent, you're going to go, all right, I'm going to run out of body parts, and I'm going to run out of places to bleed from. So maybe let's just leave that to people who know where to put it in and how to put it in. So yeah, I
Yeah.
try to stick to being a bit more psychological, simply because I'm a little bit more familiar with how that works, and not so much with how to get a intestine out of your stomach cavity and make that sound interesting.
Yeah, well, one thing I really noticed about Miss Cassidy was you have just this surface of this incredibly like this beautiful place and these wonderful smells, and then underneath it it's rotted. That's where the horror
Yeah,
comes from. It's like when you get this beautiful flower and you turn it over and there's something disgusting underneath it. And I
yeah,
enjoyed that aspect of Miss Cassidy a lot. Um, and
yeah.
and I thought, yeah, that's great. I hope that there will be more Miss Cassidy stories.
I hope to have a chance to write more. Yeah, and I think a lot of the ghosts in Singapore are similar to that. They produce a beautiful front, and then they become something horrible when you find out later on, and when it's too late, basically. And we have a ghost called the Hantu Tetek, which actually is a big boobed ghost. So she smothers men in her giant boobs. Yeah, yeah. So
Although
that was
that can be pleasurable for some people, I'm sure.
exactly. So a lot of men, they say, when if I'm going to be killed by a ghost, let it be that one. I want that.
Yeah, I could see some men that would really enjoy that. All right, I think we can probably wrap it up. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about tonight, or story writing,
Nah,
or
I think I'm good. I mean, thank you so much for giving me the chance to be in this. I mean, I read all of in your original draft. I read everybody's stories. They were so amazing. I was I was just blown away by some of the work there. So yeah, I hope you get another chance to do another one of these, and we can all contribute another story.
yes, I hope so too, and maybe more Miss Cassidy.
Oh yeah, I'll be happy to. Yes.
Great. All right. Have a great, I guess it's daytime where you are. So have a great day and enjoy the rest of get some more writing done and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Good night.
Thanks. Bye.